Welcome back to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this because today we are looking at a critical, completely missing step that is hiding in almost every single product roadmap out there. You know, we build these massive, complex products, but there's this huge bug in our process that nobody ever seems to file. We're talking about the one question roadmaps absolutely never ask. Should we actually build this?
Product leader Vijay Raut puts it perfectly. He says, "We check whether something works long before we check whether it should exist." Just think about your last roadmap review for a second. I bet the room was incredibly good at debating the trade-offs between speed and quality, right? But what happens when someone asks about consequence? Like, who does this actually affect, and did they get a say? Usually the room goes completely silent. And it's not because people don't care, it's because there is literally no place built into the process for that conversation to happen.
Now, what's really interesting here is how we treat this missing piece compared to something like, say, security. Look at the stark contrast. With security, we don't just sit around and assume engineers will magically remember to think about vulnerabilities, right? No way. We have threat modeling, pen tests, strict sign-off gates. We built all this infrastructure because we learned the hard way that good intentions are just not a reliable control. But for ethics, we kind of treat it as a personality trait. We just rely on individual conscience. And honestly, that simply doesn't scale across a 40-person team shipping weekly, and it definitely doesn't survive contact with a quarter where your growth numbers are suddenly behind plan.
Part 1. A disguised metrics problem.
This brings us to a major paradigm shift. Most ethical failures in product development aren't, well, actually scratch that. They are almost never caused by cartoon villains making evil choices in a dark room. They're caused by good, hardworking people optimizing a totally honest metric way past its expiration date. Raut argues that every metric has an expiration date on its innocence. Let that really sink in for a second. Think about engagement time. It used to be a super reasonable proxy for user value, right? Until it became the absolute target and teams started building for compulsion instead of usefulness. Or take conversion rate. It's a great proxy for product market fit until dark patterns completely hijack it. The metric didn't lie to you, it just got optimized so hard that it stopped meaning what it originally meant. That means ethics isn't just some fluffy values problem, it's a hardcore design and metrics problem.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why our current approach is failing. Take a look at this survey data from 40 product teams. Where is ethical debt actually being created? A massive 38% happens right in backlog grooming, another 27% during metric definition, and only 7% post-launch. The trade-offs are being made weeks before a single line of code is ever written, right when someone quietly chooses the version of the feature that moves the numbers the fastest. So if you're only reviewing for ethics at the ship gate, you are entirely too late.
Part 2. The 5-lens framework.
So how do we actually fix this before the ship gate? We need structural checkpoints. Enter a super practical, rapid-fire solution, the 5-lens framework. These are 5 specific checkpoints woven directly into your existing development lifecycle. They force the right questions at the exact right moment. Lens number 1 is stakeholder mapping. Before a single line of spec is written, you need to list every single party touched by this feature. And we aren't just talking about the active user or the buyer. What about the non-user who gets affected? Think about the gig worker who gets rated by the new algorithm, or the person whose data is enriching someone else's profile. If an affected stakeholder doesn't have a voice in the room, someone has to be formally assigned to represent their interest.
Moving right along to Lens 2, consent, clarity. Can a reasonably attentive user explain in just one plain sentence what they're agreeing to and what happens to their data as a result? This is a brutal but absolutely necessary filter. If the honest answer requires your legal team to translate it, the feature fails immediately. It fails before it ships, not months later after a regulator comes knocking to ask that exact same question.
Next up is Lens 3, the reversibility check. Can this decision be undone, both by the user and by the company, without disproportionate cost? Look, we need to stop building digital roach motels. Features that quietly lock people in with data portability blocks, cancellation mazes, or those sneaky one-way defaults. They get flagged right here. They must be redesigned or explicitly escalated. They should absolutely never be shipped by default.
Okay, Lens 4 is the metric integrity audit. You have to name your primary success metric and then immediately name the absolute cheapest way to game it. If the cheapest way to hit your number also happens to be the worst possible outcome for the user, you've got a major vulnerability. You must pair that metric with a guardrail metric before launch, not a month later when the gaming suddenly shows up on your dashboard.
And finally, Lens 5, the second-order review. Assume the feature works exactly as intended and succeeds beyond your wildest expectations. Now, what does the world look like if 1 million people use it that exact way every single day for 3 years? This is absolutely crucial. This is the lens that catches those slow burn disasters that an A/B test is literally never ever going to surface.
Part 3. The FinTech Checkout Test.
Let's ground all these abstract concepts in a real scenario. Imagine a fintech growth team wants to increase repeat purchase conversion. How? By defaulting the Save This Card toggle to On at checkout. The modeled lift for this change? A solid plus 6% conversion on the second purchase. On paper, for a growth team under pressure, this looks like a beautifully clean win, right? Everyone's high-fiving. But let's run this seemingly simple little toggle through our 5 lenses.
It utterly fails. Across the board. Through stakeholder mapping, the affected party isn't just the buyer, it's every future household member who might use that shared device. Through consent clarity, most users won't even notice the pre-checked box exists. Through reversibility, removing a saved card takes 4 taps buried deep in the account settings, which creates this huge asymmetric friction between opting in and opting out. Through metric integrity, that 6% is partly just measuring user inattention, not genuine intent. And through the second-order review, well, at scale, this generates thousands of angry support tickets from unrecognized charges and creates massive regulatory exposure.
So the team redesigns it, they default the toggle to off, they build a simple one-tap removal flow, and they track unintended charge disputes as their guardrail. So the crucial point is, the new conversion lift lands at plus 3.5% instead of 6%. That 2.5% drop, that is the literal acceptable cost of an ethical review. And honestly, giving up 2.5% is infinitely cheaper than writing an apology blog post 8 months later while dealing with a total PR nightmare.
Part 4. Building ethical infrastructure.
The really good news here is you absolutely do not need to form a new committee or plan some massive corporate rollout to implement this. You just need 3 boring yet highly effective structural changes that fit right into your existing Jira workflows today. First, add 1 field to your product requirements document template. Who could this hurt and how would we know? And a blank answer just isn't allowed. Second, pair every single North Star metric with a guardrail metric in the exact same dashboard. If growth and trust live in completely different documents, trust is always going to lose the argument for attention. And third, assign 1 named owner per squad to explicitly ask that second-order review question at each major milestone. Ownership without a specific name attached quietly becomes ownership by no one.
And that brings us to a thought that just beautifully summarizes everything we've talked about. Ethics reviewed only at the ship gate isn't ethics. It's an autopsy performed on a decision that already happened. Think about it. If you wait until the very end of your pipeline to check for consequences, you are really just examining the corpse of a bad decision.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really profound shift in perspective. The product teams that get this right aren't necessarily the most virtuous. They are simply the most structured. Stop asking, are we good people? Instead, ask yourselves this provocative question. Did we build a process that would catch us if we weren't good people? Today, under pressure? That is a question you can actually answer. Start right there and build the infrastructure your roadmap actually deserves. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you on the next one.